Dawn, HOA President Delilah Thornberry rolls up in her spotless SUV, flanked by county officials clutching a cease and desist order.
Your well breaks our water covenant.
She sneers, clipboard raised.
Shut it down today. Cap it in 48 hours, or $500 daily fines kick in and keep stacking.
The smell of diesel mixes with morning dew as she jabs a finger at my $12,000 permitted wellhead. This water? It's the HOAs now, Marcus. Hand it over. She never suspected I'd quietly dissected every page of the bylaws, state riparian laws, and covenants for 3 long years. One overlooked loophole waited in my files, sharp enough to cut through their whole claim. They arrived to seize my water source. They drove away facing 6-figure penalties that crushed their budget. What would you do if your HOA came for the well keeping your farm alive? Name your state below, Texas, Florida, Cali, and share your wildest HOA nightmare in the comments. I read every one. My name's Samuel Caldwell, 3rd-generation rancher on this 40-acre spread in Millbrook County, Texas. While most guys spent evenings watching ESPN, I'd been buried in water rights law for 3 years, ever since politicians started eyeing rural properties for development opportunities. Call it paranoia, but something about city council meetings discussing eminent domain made my gut twist. So I educated myself on exactly what rights came with this land. Good thing I did. The drought hit brutal last summer. Municipal water restrictions meant suburbanites kept their pools while my cattle crowded around a shrinking pond, ribs showing through their hides. The metallic taste of desperation filled my mouth every morning watching them suffer. That's when I remembered Dad's old papers. Digging through his files, I found pure gold. A 1924 deed guaranteeing perpetual subsurface water rights to Caldwell family heirs. The smell of aged paper and farm dust hit my nostrils as I realized this document was bulletproof. Jake Morrison, my lawyer buddy from high school, whistled when he saw it. Marcus, this predates every water law on the books. File your permits and drill. 6 weeks of paperwork later, Ace Well Drilling showed up. The metallic clang of their rig echoed across my drought-cracked pasture like salvation itself. Then she appeared. Delilah Thornberry stepped from her spotless Escalade looking like she'd never touched anything that might chip her salon nails. Designer blazer, yoga pants worth more than my feed bill, blonde hair sprayed into an indestructible helmet. She ruled Pine Haven Estates, the McMansion subdivision that had annexed my property during last year's boundary redraw. Former city council member who'd lost re-election after treating taxpayer money like her shopping fund. Now she channeled that control-freak energy into HOA tyranny. This industrial noise is unacceptable, she announced, heels sinking into my clay soil. I wiped grease from my hands, trying neighborly. Just drilling a livestock well, ma'am, all permitted, and cease and desist. She thrust papers at me like a weapon. You're violating multiple covenants. 48 hours to fill this in or daily fines start. I opened her folder and nearly laughed. They claimed my well violated community harmony standards and required HOA approval for resource extraction. 3 years of legal study had prepared me for exactly this garbage. Ma'am, this is agricultural property with pre-existing water rights. Your HOA has 0 jurisdiction here. Her Botoxed face went nuclear. Those covenants were signed by the previous owner, Mr. Caldwell. They transfer with the deed. Non-compliance means $500 daily fines, and we will collect. Here's where it got interesting. We'll also be filing liens against your property for unpaid assessments, she continued, voice dripping venom, plus legal fees, plus interest. Keep digging that hole, literally and figuratively. The diesel fumes mixed with her overpowering perfume as she leaned closer. I've shut down 3 other agricultural operations in this neighborhood, Marcus. Yours won't be any different. My blood went cold. She wasn't just targeting me, she was systematically eliminating rural properties. This was a pattern, not personal beef. See, property values matter here, she smirked. Barnyard smells and industrial equipment hurt everyone's investment. The County Planning Commission understands that. So does the Zoning Board. So do the judges who sign our collection orders. As her Escalade disappeared in dust and entitlement, I stood there processing what just happened. This woman hadn't come to negotiate or compromise. She'd come to deliver an ultimatum backed by systematic corruption. She thought some HOA paperwork trumped century-old water rights. She believed her suburban development could steamroll agricultural heritage. She'd apparently succeeded before. But here's what Delilah Thornberry didn't know. I wasn't some unprepared farmer she could bulldoze with legal threats. I'd spent 3 years studying every law, every loophole, every precedent case, and I was about to show her exactly how expensive it gets when you threaten Texas cattle with dying of thirst. The drilling finished on Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Delilah had declared total war. I was checking cattle when Jake's pickup came screaming up my drive, dust cloud chasing him like the devil himself. He jumped out clutching legal papers, sweat streaming down his face despite the cool morning air. "Marcus, she's gone nuclear. Emergency injunction filed with the county." My blood turned to ice water as I read her complaint. She was claiming my well-constituted illegal commercial water extraction without environmental impact assessment. Plus, she'd dragged 3 HOA board members to court as witnesses, armed with professional photographs of my wellhead from every conceivable angle. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded like breaking bones as I paced, processing this escalation. Commercial extraction? It's a livestock well, not an oil refinery. Gets worse. Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Judge Hartwell presiding. My stomach dropped through the earth's core. Hartwell owned 2 rental properties in Pine Haven Estates. This wasn't judicial coincidence. This was a stacked deck. But here's something I'd learned during those 3 years buried in water rights case law. When politicians try to steamroll you with process, you beat them with better process. That evening, I made 3 strategic calls. First, to Dr. Sarah Palmer, the state hydrologist who'd surveyed our regional aquifer system back in 2019. Second, to my cousin Danny at County Records. Guy owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move last spring. Third, to Jake's contact at the Agricultural Extension Office. "Danny, I need every environmental assessment filed in this county over 5 years, specifically anything from Pine Haven Estates development." "That's mountain-sized paperwork, cuz. What's the angle?" Checking if they filed impact studies for their own water usage before pointing fingers at mine. The hearing room reeked of burnt coffee and nervous sweat when we arrived Friday morning. Delilah sat ramrod straight in a Navy power suit, flanked by her board cronies and a silver-haired lawyer whose hourly rate probably exceeded my monthly income. Judge Hartwell barely acknowledged our presence. "Ms. Thornberry, present your emergency motion." She rose like she was accepting an Oscar. "Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell's unauthorized industrial drilling threatens our community's entire groundwater supply. His operation lacks mandatory environmental assessments, ignores county planning protocols, and flagrantly violates established neighborhood covenants designed to protect residential harmony." Her attorney produced documentation thick enough to stop bullets. Exhibits A through J demonstrate clear violations of Municipal Code 47B regarding commercial water extraction in residential zones. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as Delilah's smug confidence filled the room like toxic gas. Then I stood up, and everything changed. "Your Honor, if I may address the environmental impact allegation." I pulled out Dr. Palmer's hydrological analysis, remembering exactly why I'd requested her survey 3 years ago when I first suspected this kind of legal ambush might come. "This county commission study shows my well accesses the Carrizo Aquifer, 43 feet below the Trinity Formation that supplies Pine Haven Estates. Completely separate water sources with zero impact on their supply." Delilah's confident mask slipped like cheap makeup in rain. "Furthermore," I continued, spreading Danny's research across the table, "county records reveal Pine Haven Estates development extracted 2.3 million gallons during construction, without filing a single environmental assessment. Their swimming pools, irrigation systems, and decorative fountains consume more water daily than my entire cattle operation uses monthly." The judge's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline as the evidence mounted. "Finally, Your Honor, here's my 1924 water rights deed, predating their development by 8 decades, plus state agricultural exemption certificate and county drilling permit. Everything legal, documented, and approved by the same office that rubber-stamped their subdivision." Delilah's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear while her face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light. Judge Hartwell studied our documentation with the intensity of a man realizing he'd walked into the wrong courtroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while Delilah's composure disintegrated like sugar in acid rain. "Motion for emergency injunction denied," he announced. Mr. Caldwell's water extraction appears fully compliant with established regulations and pre-existing rights. The sound of Delilah's briefcase snapping shut cracked through the room like a rifle shot, but as we packed our victory, she cornered me in the hallway, her whispered words dripping venom. "Enjoy this moment, Marcus. I have resources you can't imagine, and time. Lots and lots of time to make your life miserable." The institutional smell of floor wax and bureaucratic defeat hung heavy as her heels clicked away like an angry typewriter. Jake was grinning ear to ear in the parking lot. That couldn't have gone better. I wasn't celebrating yet. Those years studying legal warfare had taught me something crucial. Embarrassing someone like Delilah in public doesn't make them retreat, it makes them reload with bigger ammunition. Sure enough, that afternoon's mail brought certified letters to every Pine Haven household. Notice of HOA special assessment, emergency legal defense fund, $2,847 per household, due within 30 days. She was making my neighbors pay for her failed lawsuit with their own money, turning 60 families against me using classic political manipulation, make the victim fund the next attack. But Delilah had just made her biggest tactical error yet. Within 48 hours of that special assessment notice, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Tom Patterson called first, voice cracking. "Marcus, my wife's having panic attacks over this bill. $2,800, we're barely making mortgage payments." Betty Morse, elderly widow down the street, called crying. "They say if I don't pay, they'll lien my house. I'm on Social Security. This will destroy me." By week's end, I'd heard from 15 families, all terrified, all angry, all starting to realize Delilah was funding her personal vendetta with their grocery money. That's when she escalated to psychological warfare. Monday morning brought a surprise visitor, County Health Inspector Janet Mills, looking uncomfortable as she climbed from her official vehicle. "Marcus, I hate doing this, but we received complaints about potential groundwater contamination from your drilling operation." The morning air suddenly felt thick as molasses. Complaints from who? Anonymous tips. Multiple sources claiming livestock illness, unusual odors, possible chemical runoff. She pulled out her testing kit with obvious reluctance. "I'm required to investigate." My blood pressure spiked like a rocket. Delilah wasn't just spreading rumors. She was weaponizing county bureaucracy against me. But here's something I'd learned during those years studying agricultural harassment cases. When officials investigate false complaints, documented evidence becomes your best friend. I'd been taking weekly water samples since the well went operational, plus detailed cattle health logs. "Janet, test whatever you need. But first, look at this." I handed her 3 months of veterinary records showing perfect livestock health, plus my own water quality documentation. "Every test I've run shows this water cleaner than city supply." The inspector's official samples took 2 days to process. When results came back, her phone call carried barely contained amazement. "Marcus, your water quality exceeds state standards by significant margins. Mineral content's perfect for livestock, zero bacterial contamination, pH levels that make municipal water look questionable." The mini twist hit like lightning, splitting an oak tree. "In fact," Janet continued, "I'm recommending your source for the county's emergency drought relief program. This is exactly what farming operations need during water restrictions." I felt puzzle pieces clicking together with mechanical precision. That same afternoon, Delilah launched her media campaign. The local newspaper received an anonymous press release titled "Environmental Concerns Mount Over Unauthorized Agricultural Drilling." The article quoted multiple residents expressing fears about industrial contamination and threats to residential safety. She'd coordinated perfectly: plant false complaints, trigger official investigation, then leak concerns to media while tests were pending. Classic political manipulation: create the story, then report on the story you created. Except her timing was catastrophically wrong. Wednesday's paper had to run a correction when Janet Mills contacted the editor directly. The county health department finds no environmental concerns regarding the Caldwell agricultural operation. Water quality testing shows exceptional results exceeding all regulatory standards. But Delilah wasn't backing down. Thursday brought her masterstroke: an emergency HOA meeting to address ongoing community safety concerns despite conflicting official reports. The community center buzzed with nervous energy when I arrived. 60 people packed into folding chairs, including several faces I didn't recognize, probably Delilah's reinforcements from outside the neighborhood. the smell of industrial carpet cleaner mixed with fierce sweat and expensive perfume. "Friends and neighbors," Delilah began, projecting authority like a tent revival preacher. "We're facing a crisis that threatens our community's health and property values." She'd prepared a slideshow featuring enlarged photos of my wellhead, making my simple livestock pump look like industrial equipment. Independent sources have raised serious questions about groundwater contamination. 3 families have expressed concerns about their children's safety. The crowd murmured nervously as she built momentum. Furthermore, property values in agricultural adjacent areas typically decline 15 to 20%. We're looking at collective losses exceeding $2 million if this industrial operation expands. That's when I stood up, holding Janet Mills's official report like ammunition. "Excuse me, but everyone deserves accurate information." My voice cut through the nervous chatter like a chainsaw through pine. "This is the County Health Department's official assessment, completed this week." I read directly from Janet's findings. "Water quality exceeds all state and federal standards. 0 contamination detected. Mineral content optimal for agricultural use. No environmental concerns identified." The room went silent except for fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry wasps. Additionally, I continued, remembering every agricultural protection statute I'd studied. The county has approved my well for emergency drought relief. Starting next week, any farming operation experiencing water shortage can access my supply through the mutual aid program. Delilah's perfectly composed mask cracked like old paint in summer heat, but her response proved just how desperate she'd become. "Those results are obviously compromised. I'm filing complaints with the state environmental agency, the federal EPA, and demanding congressional investigation of county corruption." The sound of 60 people shifting uncomfortably in metal chairs filled the room like autumn leaves rustling before a storm. She'd just threatened to involve federal agencies in her personal property dispute, and everyone in that room knew it. Delilah's federal agency threats weren't empty theater. Within 10 days, she'd weaponized every bureaucracy she could find. The EPA sent a formal inquiry letter requesting voluntary cooperation with environmental assessment procedures. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality scheduled an inspection visit. Even the state attorney general's office opened a file based on her agricultural contamination concerns. She was carpet bombing regulatory agencies, hoping something would explode in her favor. But here's what 3 years of legal study had taught me. When someone files multiple frivolous complaints, they create evidence of their own malicious intent. Each false report becomes ammunition for your harassment case. I started documenting everything with the precision of someone who knew this was building toward something bigger. EPA Inspector David Palmer arrived Wednesday looking like he'd rather be investigating actual polluters. His attitude transformed completely when I handed him County Health Department findings, veterinary assessments, and 3 months of voluntary water testing data. "Mr. Caldwell, this documentation exceeds what most commercial operations provide," he said, scanning my meticulously organized files. "Your compliance record is remarkable for a private agricultural well." The morning sun warmed my shoulders as Palmer completed his field assessment, the smell of fresh hay mixing with diesel exhaust from his government vehicle. "Honestly, I wish every farming operation maintained records like yours. This complaint appears entirely without merit." That afternoon brought a call from Jake that made my pulse quicken. "Marcus, she's overextended herself badly. The HOA board is in revolt. Turns out she's been spending association funds without authorization for months." The mini twist arrived that evening when Tom Patterson appeared at my door carrying a thick manila folder, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained outrage. "Marcus, you need to see this financial nightmare." His hands trembled slightly as he spread documents across my kitchen table, the papers rustling like angry wasps. "Betty Morse and I requested HOA financial records for the past 2 years. What we found is criminal." My eyes widened, scanning the evidence. Delilah had charged the association for personal legal expenses, private investigators monitoring problem neighbors, and consulting fees for environmental reports supporting her complaints against rural properties. "She spent $18,000 of community money fighting you," Tom continued, voice gaining strength with each revelation. "Plus another $12,000 targeting the Henderson farm last year, and $8,000 harassing the Murphy family before they sold and moved." The metallic taste of vindication flooded my mouth. This wasn't just about my well anymore. This was a pattern of systematic abuse spanning years. "Tom, this is embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty." I I remembered studying similar cases where HOA board members faced personal bankruptcy after misusing association funds. She's personally liable for every dollar plus criminal prosecution. But Delilah wasn't finished escalating. Friday morning brought her most audacious move yet. I was checking cattle water levels when 3 vehicles rolled into my driveway, 2 black sedans and Delilah's signature white Escalade. Out stepped what looked like a professional investigation team, 2 men in expensive suits, a woman with sophisticated testing equipment, and someone carrying an official-looking briefcase. "Mr. Caldwell," the lead investigator announced, "I'm attorney William Cross, representing the Pine Haven Environmental Coalition. This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Independent Water Assessment Services, and we're here to conduct comprehensive environmental impact analysis." The autumn air suddenly felt thick with tension and expensive cologne as they deployed across my property like an occupying army. The crunch of gravel under their city shoes sounded like breaking bones. Dr. Mitchell began setting up equipment that looked more sophisticated than NASA launches. "Sir, we'll need detailed water samples, soil analysis, and complete operational documentation. This assessment will determine your operation's environmental compliance status." My gut churned watching this expensive theater unfold. Delilah had hired her own environmental army, probably costing more than my annual cattle feed budget. As the assessment progressed, I noticed something interesting. Dr. Mitchell worked with methodical precision, but her expressions grew increasingly puzzled. She tested my water against multiple standards, ran soil samples through portable analyzers, and documented everything with scientific thoroughness. After 4 hours of intensive investigation, she approached me while her team packed equipment. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm required to submit findings to our client, but I document only factual results. Your water quality exceeds every environmental standard we test for." Watching Delilah orchestrate her expensive investigation while unknowingly proving my operation's excellence felt like watching someone pay premium prices to build their own gallows. The sound of expensive equipment being loaded echoed across my pasture as the convoy prepared to leave. Delilah approached me one last time, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Enjoy your last few weeks of operation, Marcus. When our report proves environmental violations, you'll be permanently shut down." But as her Escalade disappeared in a cloud of dust and desperation, I realized she'd just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed. Her own hired experts would soon deliver a report proving my operation's complete environmental compliance, while Tom's financial evidence documented years of illegal fund misuse. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes in a perfect line, and I was about to push the first one. 3 days after Delilah's expensive environmental circus, I was reviewing Tom's financial evidence when my cousin Danny called from the county records office, voice crackling with excitement. "Marcus, remember those old HOA incorporation documents I've been digging through? Well, I found something that's going to make your head spin." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "What kind of something?" "The kind that turns HOA presidents into defendants. Get down here before closing time." 20 minutes later, I stood in the basement archives of Millbrook County Courthouse, surrounded by filing cabinets that reeked of decades-old paper and bureaucratic neglect. Danny spread yellowed documents across a metal table under fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying wasps. "Look at this original 1987 survey map." His finger traced faded boundary lines on Pine Haven Estates Incorporation papers. "Your 40 acres were explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction. See this notation? Agricultural operations and associated water rights exempt from residential covenants." My heart hammered against my ribs as I studied the faded red ink. The original survey showed my property clearly outside HOA boundaries, marked with thick lines and "exempt agricultural use" in block letters. But they annexed me last year during the boundary expansion. That's where it gets beautiful. Danny pulled out a fresh folder containing 2023 documents, the crisp white paper contrasting sharply with the aged originals. The boundary expansion was filed by Delilah Thornberry as HOA president, but she never obtained required approval from affected property owners, as mandated by state law. The metallic taste of vindication flooded my mouth like copper pennies dissolving on my tongue. "Marcus, this annexation was completely illegal. Every fine, every cease and desist, every threat. She had zero legal authority. Your property should never have been under HOA control." I stared at the documents while my 3 years of legal preparation crystallized into perfect clarity. Danny, this means she's been operating under fraudulent authority. Gets better. State law requires 30-day written notice to all affected landowners before boundary changes. Delilah filed expansion papers but never sent notifications. She knew exactly what she was doing, grabbing power without following procedures. The implications crashed over me like a dam bursting. The Henderson farm that sold under HOA pressure. The Murphy family that relocated rather than fight. Every rural operation systematically eliminated through harassment. How many other properties were illegally annexed? I asked, though my gut already knew the answer would be devastating. 7 agricultural operations total, all harassed into compliance or forced to sell after annexation. Danny's voice carried the weight of discovered injustice. She's been running a systematic land grab using fabricated authority. The sound of my pulse thundered in my ears as the scope of Delilah's corruption became clear. This wasn't personal vendetta. This was organized crime wearing suburban respectability. Marcus, this is federal territory. Fraud under color of authority, conspiracy to deprive constitutional property rights, potentially racketeering if you can prove coordination. I photographed every document with trembling hands, the camera clicks echoing through the archive room like gunshots. Her expensive environmental assessments, federal agency complaints, systematic HOA fund misuse. Every escalation had been taken under authority she never legally possessed. As I drove home clutching copies of the smoking gun evidence, one thought kept hammering through my mind. Delilah Thornberry had spent 2 years, tens of thousands of dollars, and countless hours waging war against someone who was never legally subject to her control. She'd been fighting a ghost of her own creation. A phantom enemy she'd invented through fraudulent paperwork and illegal boundary manipulation. But now that ghost was about to materialize into something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. A federal case with her name on the defendant line, carrying penalties that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The hunter had just become the hunted, and hunting season was about to open. That evening, I spread Danny's smoking gun documents across my kitchen table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. The musty smell of decades-old paper mixed with fresh coffee as Jake arrived, followed by Tom Patterson and Betty Morse carrying a box of financial records that would make federal prosecutors salivate. "Folks," I began, my pulse hammering with 3 years of pent-up legal preparation finally finding its target. "We're not fighting an overreaching HOA anymore. We're exposing organized crime wearing a suburban mask." Betty's weathered hands trembled as she studied the 1987 boundary map. "You mean when they destroyed the Hendersons last year?" "Every single action was federal fraud," Jake confirmed, his lawyer's instincts practically purring as he spread additional research beside Danny's evidence. "Delilah's been operating under fabricated authority for 18 months. What followed felt like planning D-Day, if D-Day involved property law and public humiliation instead of bullets and beaches. The evidence chain we assembled would make prosecutors weep with joy. 7 illegally annexed properties. Systematic harassment spanning 2 years. Financial records proving thousands of dollars misappropriated for personal legal warfare. Each piece connected like clockwork gears in a machine designed for justice. "Here's something I learned during my deep dive into agricultural protection statutes," I said, remembering nights spent buried in federal law books while other ranchers watched television. When officials systematically target farming operations under false authority, it triggers mandatory penalties under the Federal Agricultural Land Protection Act. Minimum damages start at $50,000 per violation. Tom's calculator app worked overtime. 7 properties, multiple violations each. Jesus, Marcus, we're looking at $500,000 in federal penalties alone. But the real trap wouldn't be legal paperwork. It would be theater. "The HOA annual meeting is next Saturday," I continued, producing the community center reservation form. "Public venue, all residents required to attend, media welcome. Delilah will walk into that room thinking she controls the narrative." Jake's grin spread like wildfire. "And walk out in handcuffs if she's smart." Over the next 3 days, we orchestrated preparation with surgical precision. Jake contacted federal agricultural crimes investigators and white-collar prosecutors. Tom organized affected families and documented neighbors. Betty handled media outreach, positioning this as community defending itself against systematic abuse. Meanwhile, I prepared the physical demonstration that would make federal fraud charges feel like Saturday morning cartoons. Wednesday found me at Office Depot, purchasing projection equipment that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. If Delilah wanted visual presentations, I'd deliver a masterpiece that would hang in courtrooms for years. The presentation I assembled told the story through irrefutable documentation. Original incorporation boundaries showing clear agricultural exemptions, fraudulent 2023 annexation filed without legal notifications, financial records proving systematic fund misuse, timeline demonstrating pattern harassment spanning multiple victims. But the centerpiece would destroy her credibility with nuclear efficiency, side-by-side comparison of her claimed authority versus actual legal documents proving she possessed none. Thursday brought unexpected artillery from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the environmental consultant Delilah had hired to torpedo my operation. Her call came while I calibrated presentation equipment in my barn, the smell of hay and electronic circuits creating an oddly satisfying combination. Mr. Caldwell, my assessment is complete, and professional ethics require I inform you of results before submitting to my client. Her voice carried barely concealed satisfaction. Your operation exceeds environmental compliance in every measurable category. Water quality, soil impact, agricultural standards, exemplary across the board. The irony tasted better than aged whiskey. Delilah's expensive investigation had produced expert testimony demolishing her own case. Dr. Mitchell, would you present these findings at our community meeting Saturday? I'd consider it professional obligation. My reputation depends on documenting facts regardless of who pays my invoices. Recito. Friday evening brought final strategy refinement with Jake in my kitchen. Barbecue smoke drifted through windows as we reviewed presentation materials that would soon become federal evidence. This is prosecutorial pornography, Jake said, studying our evidence compilation. Federal fraud charges, state agricultural violations, HOA financial crimes, civil rights violations under color of law. She's facing personal bankruptcy, criminal prosecution, and federal penalties that'll follow her to the grave. But Saturday morning brought one final preparation that would turn her own psychological warfare against her. I installed security cameras around the community center with Tom's assistance, ensuring every interaction would be documented. If she attempted intimidation, threats, or disruption, we'd have federal evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. As afternoon approached, I felt the cold calm that comes from absolute preparation meeting righteous fury. 3 years of legal study while she practiced systematic fraud, months of documentation while she committed federal crimes. The sound of equipment loading into my truck echoed across drought-stressed pastures as I secured presentation materials and evidence boxes. 60 families would witness the corruption that had been bleeding their community. Tonight, the hunter would finally corner her prey. And Delilah Thornberry would learn that sometimes, when you wage war under false pretenses, the education costs everything you own. Saturday morning brought chaos wrapped in designer clothing and desperation perfume. I was loading my presentation equipment when Jake called, voice tight with barely controlled fury. Marcus, she's lost her damn mind. Emergency court filing at 8 a.m. claiming you're planning to disrupt a lawful HOA meeting with fraudulent documents and intimidation tactics. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. She's trying to get an injunction to stop tonight's meeting? Worse, she's requesting a restraining order preventing you from attending your own community meeting, claims you pose a threat to neighborhood safety and community harmony. The metallic taste of rage flooded my mouth as I processed her latest escalation. Delilah wasn't just doubling down, she was going all in with a handful of nothing. But here's what 3 years of legal study had taught me about desperate opponents. When they start filing emergency motions on Saturday mornings, they're not playing chess anymore. They're throwing grenades in a bunker with the pin already pulled. Jake, let her file whatever she wants. Every frivolous motion becomes evidence of malicious prosecution. What I didn't expect was the caravan that rolled into my driveway at noon. 3 sheriff's department vehicles, 2 unmarked sedans, and Delilah's Escalade formed a convoy that looked like they were serving warrants on a drug kingpin. Out stepped Deputy Morrison, no relation to Jake, a federal agent I didn't recognize, and Delilah wearing a navy suit that screamed, "I'm the victim here." "Mr. Caldwell," Deputy Morrison called out, approaching with obvious reluctance. "We have a temporary restraining order requiring you to maintain 500 yards distance from all HOA board members and community meetings." The autumn air suddenly felt thick enough to cut with a chainsaw as I read the emergency order. Judge Hartwell had signed off on Delilah's request without scheduling a hearing or allowing me to respond. But then the federal agent stepped forward, and everything changed. Mr. Caldwell, I'm Special Agent Catherine Walsh, FBI White Collar Crime Division. I'm not here to serve papers. Her voice carried authority that made Deputy Morrison step back. I'm here to inform you that your harassment complaint triggered a federal investigation into systematic fraud under color of authority. My pulse hammered against my collar as the implications hit home. Ma'am, Agent Walsh continued, turning toward Delilah with laser focus. Filing false emergency motions to prevent a victim from participating in community meetings could constitute additional charges of obstruction and witness intimidation. Delilah's perfectly composed mask cracked like old paint. Agent Walsh, Mr. Caldwell has been threatening our community for months. This restraining order is for everyone's protection. Miss Thornberry, our investigation shows systematic financial fraud, illegal boundary manipulation, and abuse of administrative authority spanning 2 years. Would you like to explain how protecting your community required violating federal agricultural protection laws? The sound of Delilah's legal world collapsing echoed across my pasture like breaking glass. But she wasn't finished yet. Her final desperate gambit came that afternoon when Tom Patterson called, voice shaking with outrage. Marcus, she's hired private security for tonight's meeting. 3 armed guards claiming authority to remove disruptive individuals from community proceedings. My gut twisted like barbed wire. She was turning a neighborhood HOA meeting into an armed standoff. Plus, Tom continued, she's scheduled the meeting for 6 p.m. instead of 7, hoping to reduce attendance, and moved it from the community center to the clubhouse, private property where she claims control over access. Agent Walsh's business card felt warm in my pocket as I processed Delilah's escalation. Every move she made was digging her federal grave deeper. That evening, I arrived at the clubhouse to find a scene that belonged in a military occupation manual. Private security guards in tactical gear flanked the entrance, while Delilah stood behind a podium like a dictator addressing her subjects. 60 residents had packed into a space designed for 30. The air thick with tension and the smell of fear sweat mixed with expensive cologne. But something was different about this crowd. I saw anger in faces that had previously shown only resignation. Betty Morse stood near the back, holding a folder thick with financial evidence. Tom Patterson sat in the front row with 7 other illegally harassed families. Jake had positioned himself near the AV equipment with federal backup documentation ready. As Delilah called the meeting to order, I realized her security theater had backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating residents into silence, she'd created the perfect setting for her own public destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying artificial authority, tonight we address the ongoing agricultural contamination crisis threatening our community's health and property values. But before she could continue building her fabricated narrative, I stood up, federal evidence folder in hand, and said the words that would change everything. Point of order, Madam President. Before we discuss agricultural issues, shouldn't we address the fact that you have no legal authority over agricultural properties in this community? The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the collective intake of 60 people's breath. Private security looked confused. Delilah's face went through more color changes than a traffic light having a seizure. And Agent Walsh, who'd quietly entered during Delilah's opening remarks, stepped forward with handcuffs that caught the overhead lighting like promises of justice. The silence stretched like piano wire about to snap as Agent Walsh moved through the packed clubhouse, her federal badge cutting through Delilah's private security like a hot knife through butter. Ma'am, you'll need to step away from the podium, Agent Walsh said, her voice carrying authority that made the armed guards look like children playing dress-up. This meeting is now part of an active federal investigation. Delilah's desperate laugh echoed through the room like breaking glass. Agent Walsh, you're disrupting a lawful community meeting. These residents deserve to hear about the environmental crimes being committed by Ms. Thornberry. You're making statements under false authority about fabricated environmental violations. I strongly advise you to exercise your right to remain silent. But Delilah had passed the point of rational decision-making. Her final meltdown was about to provide everything federal prosecutors needed. You people don't understand, she continued, pointing accusingly at me while her voice climbed toward hysteria. Samuel Caldwell has been poisoning our groundwater for months. His illegal well is destroying property values and threatening children's health. Agent Walsh activated a digital recorder as Delilah continued building her perjury case in real time. I've spent 18 months and $20,000 of community funds investigating his criminal operation. The EPA won't act. The county won't act. Someone has to protect this neighborhood from agricultural terrorism." The room erupted in stunned murmurs as residents processed her admission of spending their money on personal legal warfare. Tom Patterson stood up, holding the financial evidence that would end her career. "Delilah, did you just admit to spending HOA funds without board authorization to investigate a neighbor you personally dislike?" Her face went through more emotional states than a broken slot machine. "Tom, everything I did was for community protection, property values, children's safety. Someone had to what?" Agent Walsh interrupted. "Systematically harass agricultural properties using fabricated authority? File false environmental complaints? Misappropriate community funds for personal legal expenses?" Jake chose that moment to activate our presentation equipment, projecting the 1987 incorporation map onto the wall behind Delilah's podium. The original boundaries showing agricultural exemptions appeared larger than life, impossible to ignore or deny. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced, "this is Pine Haven Estates' original incorporation document clearly excluding all agricultural properties from HOA jurisdiction." Gasps filled the room like escaping steam as residents saw the evidence that would soon appear in federal court. But Delilah wasn't finished destroying herself. Her next words guaranteed criminal prosecution. "Those documents are forgeries. Samuel and his lawyer fabricated evidence to avoid legitimate community oversight. I demand federal investigation of document fraud." Agent Walsh's smile could have frozen hell. "Ms. Thornberry, are you claiming that County Records Office documents filed in 1987 are recent forgeries created by Mr. Caldwell?" The metallic taste of complete victory flooded my mouth as Delilah dug her grave deeper with every word. "Someone altered those records. Someone paid county employees to change incorporation boundaries. This is a conspiracy to avoid environmental regulations." The sound of 60 residents shifting uncomfortably filled the room like autumn leaves rustling before a storm. Even her most loyal supporters were backing away from the meltdown happening in real time. Betty Morse stepped forward with her folder of financial evidence. "Delilah, these bank records show you've been spending HOA money on personal legal fees for 2 years, $28,000 fighting agricultural properties that were never under our authority." "Betty, you don't understand the bigger picture. Property values, community character. Someone had to stop the rural invasion before—" She stopped mid-sentence as her own words echoed through the room. Rural invasion. The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke, revealing the discriminatory intent behind every action she'd taken. Agent Walsh's recorder captured every syllable as Delilah continued her public confession. "I've been protecting this community from agricultural degradation for years. The Henderson farm, the Murphy property, 3 other rural operations, I successfully eliminated them all. Samuel was supposed to be next." The room erupted in shocked silence as residents realized they'd been complicit in systematic discrimination against rural families. Dr. Sarah Mitchell chose that perfect moment to enter, carrying the environmental report that would demolish any remaining credibility Delilah possessed. "Excuse me," she announced. "I have the completed environmental assessment Ms. Thornberry commissioned regarding Mr. Caldwell's agricultural operation." Delilah's face lit with desperate hope. "Dr. Mitchell, please tell everyone about the environmental violations you discovered." "Actually, Ms. Thornberry, I found 0 environmental concerns. Mr. Caldwell's operation exceeds all regulatory standards and poses no threat to community water supplies or property values." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear individual heartbeats echoing off the walls. Agent Walsh stepped forward with handcuffs that caught the fluorescent lighting like chrome promises of justice. "Delilah Thornberry, you're under arrest for conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, mail fraud, and systematic violation of federal agricultural protection statutes." As the cuffs clicked shut around Delilah's wrists, her final words were a whispered admission that would haunt her through years of federal prosecution. "I just wanted the farms gone. All of them. Forever." The metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut on Delilah's wrists echoed through the packed clubhouse like a gavel delivering final judgment. But Agent Walsh wasn't finished. "Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting will continue as scheduled, but under federal oversight. Mr. Caldwell, you have the floor." I stepped to the podium where Delilah had been standing moments before, looking out at 60 faces that showed everything from shock to relief to barely contained rage. The smell of fierce sweat and industrial carpet cleaner hung heavy in the air as I activated Jake's presentation equipment. Folks, what you just witnessed was the arrest of someone who's been systematically defrauding this community for 2 years. The projection screen behind me displayed the original 1987 HOA incorporation map in crystal clarity. This document proves that 7 agricultural properties, including mine, were illegally annexed without proper notification or landowner consent. The crowd's collective gasp sounded like air being sucked from the room. That means every fine, every cease and desist letter, every threat made against rural families in this neighborhood was completely without legal authority. Betty Moore stood up, her voice shaking with righteous fury. Marcus, are you saying the Hendersons were illegally forced to sell their farm? The Henderson family, the Murphys, and 3 other agricultural operations were systematically harassed under fraudulent authority. Delilah used your HOA fees to fund personal legal warfare against families who were never subject to your covenants. Tom Patterson's voice cut through the shocked murmurs. $28,000 of community money spent fighting people who weren't even under our jurisdiction. Jake advanced the presentation to financial records that made the fraud undeniable. Here's documentation showing HOA funds used for private investigators, environmental consultants, and legal fees, all targeting properties that should never have been included in your association. The room erupted in angry voices as residents processed the scope of the deception. Order, please, Agent Walsh called out, though her tone suggested she was enjoying watching corruption expose itself in real time. Mr. Caldwell, continue your presentation. I clicked to the next slide. Dr. Mitchell's environmental assessment showing my water quality exceeded all safety standards. The environmental investigation that Ms. Thornberry commissioned with your money concluded that my agricultural operation poses zero threat to community health or property values. Dr. Mitchell stood up in the back of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I've tested hundreds of agricultural operations across Texas. Mr. Caldwell's water quality ranks in the top 5% for purity and mineral content. Your community is fortunate to have access to such a clean water source. The irony was so perfect it tasted like vintage wine. Furthermore, I continued, the county has approved my well for emergency drought relief protocols. Any farming operation experiencing water shortage can access my supply through the mutual aid program. An elderly man near the front raised his hand. Marcus, what does this mean for our HOA? Are we liable for what Delilah did? Agent Walsh fielded that question with professional precision. The association may face civil liability for actions taken under fraudulent authority. However, individual residents who weren't aware of the illegal annexation won't face personal consequences. What about our special assessment fees? Betty asked. The $2,800 we were charged for Delilah's legal defense fund? Those assessments were collected under false pretenses for illegal activities, I answered, remembering every detail from my agricultural law studies. You're entitled to full refunds plus interest. The HOA's insurance carrier will likely cover damages once federal prosecution concludes. And the mood in the room shifted from shock to something approaching celebration as residents realized they'd been victims, not conspirators. But I wasn't finished yet. The moment I'd been preparing for during 3 years of legal study had finally arrived. Folks, what happened here goes beyond one person's abuse of authority. This was systematic discrimination against rural families who've been part of this community for generations. My voice carried across the silent room like thunder before lightning. Delilah Thornberry spent 2 years and thousands of your dollars trying to eliminate agricultural heritage from this neighborhood. I looked directly into the news camera that had been rolling since Agent Walsh's arrest. She failed. Not just because her authority was fraudulent, but because this community is better than the hatred she represented. The sound of sustained applause filled the clubhouse as residents stood up, their relief and anger transforming into something that felt like justice being served. Agent Walsh stepped forward for her final statement. The federal investigation will continue, but Mr. Caldwell's harassment case ends tonight. His agricultural operation will continue without interference, as protected by state and federal law. As the meeting dispersed and residents filed out into the cool evening air, Tom Patterson approached me with tears in his eyes. Marcus, you didn't just save your farm tonight. You saved our whole community from someone who was destroying it from within. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined, but it came with responsibility. Justice served meant rebuilding what corruption had torn down, and tomorrow, that work would begin. 6 months later, I'm standing in my pasture watching the morning sun reflect off flowing well water while 60 head of healthy cattle drink their fill from troughs that never run dry. The federal case against Delilah wrapped up faster than anyone expected. She pled guilty to conspiracy to deprive civil rights, mail fraud, and systematic violation of agricultural protection laws. The plea deal included full restitution to affected families, plus federal penalties that totaled just over $600,000. Money she'll be paying back for the next 20 years. But the real justice came in what happened to our community afterward. The Henderson family moved back to their original farm after the fraudulent sale was voided. The Murphy property became home to a young veteran who started a sustainable agriculture operation that supplies 3 local restaurants. Every rural family that had been illegally harassed received financial compensation, plus formal apologies from the reconstituted HOA board. Tom Patterson was elected as the new HOA president on a platform of cooperation, not control. His first official act was amending the association bylaws to explicitly protect agricultural operations and prevent future boundary manipulation. Betty Morse started a neighborhood watch program, but instead of monitoring for code violations, they watch out for elderly residents who need help with groceries or yard work. The smell of community barbecues now drifts across property lines that once divided us. My well became the centerpiece of something I never expected, the Millbrook County Drought Relief Cooperative. During last summer's water restrictions, 12 farming operations accessed my supply through the mutual aid program, keeping livestock and crops alive when municipal sources failed. The county commissioned a hydrological study that confirmed what Dr. Mitchell's assessment had shown. Our aquifer system could support sustainable agricultural development while maintaining suburban water quality. Property values actually increased once realtors started marketing us as an authentic agricultural heritage community. Jake Morrison parlayed our case into a specialty practice representing rural landowners against HOA overreach. He's handled 14 similar cases across Texas, with every client winning full restitution and legal fees. The precedent we set protects thousands of agricultural families from systematic harassment. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's environmental report became required reading in her industry for ethical assessment practices. She speaks at conferences about maintaining scientific integrity regardless of client pressure, using our case as the gold standard for honest environmental evaluation. But the change I'm proudest of happens every September when we host the annual Millbrook Agricultural Heritage Festival on my property. What started as a community healing event has grown into a countywide celebration that draws over 1,000 visitors. Local high school students learn sustainable farming techniques from veteran ranchers. Urban families connect with rural neighbors over shared meals featuring locally grown food. Children who've never seen cattle up close get to experience agricultural life firsthand. The festival's scholarship program, funded partly by Delilah's restitution payments, has sent 12 young people to agricultural colleges over the past 3 years. These kids return with knowledge and passion to continue our rural heritage into the next generation. Last month, the County Planning Commission adopted new protection ordinances preventing fraudulent HOA expansion into agricultural areas. The Caldwell Protocols require environmental impact assessments, landowner consent, and agricultural protection reviews before any boundary changes can be approved. As for me, I discovered something unexpected through this whole ordeal. Leadership comes naturally when you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. The State Agricultural Association elected me to their board of directors, where I advocate for rural landowner protection across Texas. But every morning still starts the same way. Checking cattle, testing water quality, and maintaining the land my grandfather passed down to my father, who passed it to me, who will eventually pass it to the next generation. The sound of water flowing through pipes, the lowing of satisfied cattle, the crunch of boots on gravel, these are the sounds of victory, not just legal victory, but the deeper triumph of community healing and rural heritage preserved. Sometimes I still think about Delilah's final words as they led her away in handcuffs. I just wanted the farms gone. All of them. Forever. She failed. The farms are thriving, the community is stronger, and the water flows clean and clear, just like my grandfather intended when he secured those rights a century ago.